Welcome, everybody. Thank you so much for coming this morning. We really appreciate your time to learn about everything Southern. My name's Penny Brand, and I am the account manager for Travel South, based here in Sydney. So if there's anything you ever need, you can just email me, penny@gate7.com.au. So as I've mentioned before, there is just so much to see, do and explore in the South that we've had to develop a whole series on it. First stop, we looked at Southern cuisine. Then we went out and visited some national parks and seashores, then heard about the music that grew from the South, ate barbecue, and we certainly have a lot more coming up. Next month, we are going to be visiting Louisiana and see their southern highways and byways. Then it's on to West Virginia and exploring the authentic adventure and adrenaline that happens every year at Bridge Day. After that, we're going to be looking at spectator sports and the Kentucky horse riding, followed by the natural wonders and the Arkansas and Missouri Ozarks. Lastly, we'll be finishing up the series at the end of the year, celebrating the authentic Southern holidays of the South. So lots coming up, and don't forget, every episode will give away a $100 Prezi voucher, and at the very end, somebody is going to be taking home a wonderful $200 Christmas hamper. So now on to episode 5, where we'll be heading to Alabama to hear more about the US civil rights with our special guest, Michelle Browder. But first, let's have a look at the history of this important movement and how it's shaped the South. The civil rights movement was a struggle for social justice that took place mainly during the 1950s and the 1960s for Black Americans to gain equal rights under the law in the United States. The Civil War had officially abolished slavery, but it didn't end discrimination against Black people. They continued to endure the devastating effects of racism. And by the mid-20th century, Black Americans had more than enough of prejudice and violence against them. They, along with many white Americans, mobilized and began an unprecedented fight for equality that spanned 2 decades. So today, we're going to have a look at some of the stories that shaped the South and that will add depth to visiting and exploring the region. On the Louisiana Civil Rights Trail, you can discover the real-life heroes who strategized, organized, preached, marched, boycotted, and stood up, sat down, and sang for change. Real people who dedicated themselves and their lives to making civil rights real. Home to the African American Heritage Trail, where you can walk the streets where jazz was born, learn about America's first Black governor, hear about how enslaved Blacks fled the plantations to fight for the Union Army. Louisiana offers a melting pot of unique cultural experiences, especially in the historic and vibrant cities of New Orleans and Baton Rouge, where you combine the flair and flavour of Louisiana with rich civil rights heritage. And you can be sure to create an unforgettable and enlightened travel experience. In New Orleans, take the tour of William Frantz Elementary School and be inspired by the bravery of a 6-year-old Ruby Bridges. Because despite her father's misgivings, Ruby Bridges became the first Black child to desegregate William Frantz Elementary School in New Orleans in 1961. As Bridges was escorted by US Marshals, one woman would frequently threaten to block her and poison her and held up a Black baby in a coffin. In 1999, Bridges formed the Ruby Bridges Foundation to promote the values of tolerance, respect, and appreciation of all differences. And in 2014, a statue of Bridges was unveiled in the courtyard of the school. The infamous events of Mississippi's civil rights era opened the eyes of the USA and provided a window through which the entire world could observe the plague of racism and the power of those willing to fight for freedom and justice. On June the 26th, 1966, James Meredith's March Against Freedom ended its 3-week trek from Memphis to Jackson, the state capital, challenging Mississippians to register to vote. The crowd was estimated at 15,000, the largest civil rights protest in Mississippi history. Stirring speeches were delivered by Martin Luther King, Carmichael, McKissick, and the wounded Meredith, who was shot 3 times. The March Against Fear brought together organisations and introduced into the movement new urgency and the energy of Black power. And while Emmett Till, a 14-year-old, was lynched in 1955, Mississippians found themselves at the forefront of one of the most pivotal periods of American history. As this tragic event is widely considered the beginning of the modern civil rights movement, it joins other sites in the state as part of the Mississippi Freedom Trail. With 25 markers across the state, this trail helps tell the stories of the brave Mississippians who contributed to the movement that changed the world. In Jackson, the capital, visit the Mississippi Civil Rights Museum and also follow the Mississippi Freedom Trail to gain a deeper understanding of the people, places, and events that challenged our perspective and changed history. Now, Tennessee makes for an exciting travel itinerary, not just for its choice attractions, world-renowned entertainment and unique vibe, but also for the historical significance. Tennessee, like most southern states, faced many obstacles in the struggle for equality. So experience the legacy of the people, places, and events that defined the civil rights movement in the state by exploring historic sites across the state. And here, your visit will begin at the Lorraine Motel, where Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was fatally shot as he stood on the motel's balcony outside room 306. Next, stop at the Legacy Building across from the motel, the site from which Dr. King's assassin fired his shot. And here you'll find the timeline for the fight for civil rights in America that stretches from 1619 to 1968 and includes a closer look at Dr. King's assassination and the global impact. The museum also features artefacts and interactive stations where visitors can view films and listen to oral histories. Exhibits span 5 centuries and include slavery in America, student sit-ins, the Montgomery bus boycott, freedom rides, and Black power. North Carolina pioneered many firsts in the US civil rights movement. Raleigh was the birthplace of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, one of the most significant civil rights activist organisation. Raleigh also developed the first public park dedicated to Martin Luther King Jr. And by experiencing the sites and museums that commemorate these events, visitors will